Hey everyone, Charlie here. We're going to look at 5 verses in the book of Jeremiah 7 specifically, that have this incredible insight on the events of Mount Sinai, which happened mostly in Exodus 19, 20, and beyond that, where God gave the children of Israel the law. And there is this incredible insight on the law that we want to learn about and look at. So first, let's go ahead and look at Exodus, even though we're going to come back to Jeremiah, Exodus chapter 19. And you can see right here in the chapter heading, this is Israel at Mount Sinai, right? So God tells the children of Israel he's taken out of the land of Egypt to come meet him at Mount Sinai. And he says to this, "You saw what I did to the Egyptians, and I brought you out on eagle's wings. Now," and this is the command, "therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you'll be my treasured possession, and you shall be to me," this is important, "a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." These are the words you speak to the people of Israel, right? God is communicating to Moses and telling Moses that you're going to tell these things to the children of Israel so they know what to expect. And so Moses does just that, and he calls the elders of Israel together. And this is what they say. All the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." This feels pretty good. We're on track. We're doing okay. And then the Lord says, "Hey, we're going to have a little meeting. I'm going to come to you in a thick cloud that the people may hear when I speak with you and may also believe you forever." Right? So God has given Moses some very simple instructions. He said, "I'm going to meet with the people, but I want you to listen to my voice, and you're going to be a kingdom of priests." That's important, and a holy nation. And we're going to basically establish a new covenant here at Mount Sinai. So this is probably not new information if you had ever studied this passage before. So what begins to happen to the rest of chapter 19 is God kind of explains, like, "Hey, go consecrate yourselves, get ready to meet with me tomorrow. And, I don't want any beast or any man to come up the mountain, but I want you to come up to the foot of the mountain," right? And, again, there's instructions on consecrating yourself and all this different stuff. And then it says, when they went to go meet with God, Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire, right? And so there's the sound of a trumpet. The trumpet grew louder and louder. There's smoke. God's making a big deal, right? When he comes down to Mount Sinai. And what he does is he calls Moses to the top of the mountain. And then Moses goes up. But one of the first things God says is, now that you've come up, go down and warn the people to stay in place and listen to me, right? And so, again, it's just this big kind of interaction about God saying, "I want you to come up to the foot of the mountain, but only Moses is allowed to come up. And I want the rest of you to just stay in place, but I want you to come up to the mountain." So it might be helpful or illustrative really quick to kind of draw this out. So this is Mount Sinai, right? And God has just shown up in this big, thick cloud, right? So this is God. And he's making all this noise, and there's fire, there's smoke, there's trumpeting, and we've got all the Israelites here, right, coming to the mountain, and they're scared. They're kind of like, "Oh man, this is kind of a big deal." Meanwhile, you got Moses, and God is talking to Moses. So the point of this is that God wants to make a covenant with everybody, but God tells Moses to kind of come up the mountain, right? And then one of the first things he does is he sends him back down the mountain to tell the people, "Stay there, right? Don't go anywhere. Stay right here." So that's kind of as far, as we've gotten so far in chapter 19, right? I want to make that really clear. And now we're going to go look at Exodus 20. Okay, so we're all the way through Exodus 19. This is where God now gives the 10 Commandments. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't just Moses that heard the 10 Commandments, because a big part of this big interaction for Israel was they actually hear themselves the 10 Commandments. And it's later on that we have the whole thing where Moses comes down. After he writes the 10 Commandments out on tablets and breaks them, that's later, okay? This is just sort of the telling of the 10 Commandments for the first time. And, you could kind of infer a lot of these commandments just, based on what we know about God and his sense of justice and morality. Don't murder, don't steal your neighbor's wife, honor your father and mother, Sabbath day. So we're not going to dive into the 10 commandments, but the people hear the 10 commandments live from the top of the mountain. I mean, like, how crazy is that? And when God is done telling them the 10 commandments, he must kind of take a breath or pause because it gives the people a chance now to interact with Moses. So it says this: when the people saw the thunder and the flashes and the sound of the trumpet, the mountains smoking, and it says right here, the people were afraid and trembled and they stood far off. Now that's interesting. They're supposed to be standing pretty close to the mountain and they are standing further away. And they said to Moses, and this is important, I think, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die, right? Now that is a very interesting thing to say, right? The whole point is God brought you to Sinai. He's making a covenant, not just with Moses, but with all of you. He wants you to hear the words of the covenant. And they say to Moses, hey, we're not having fun. And Moses says to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. And again, what I'm telling you right now is that there's something going on here that we often don't catch from just quickly reading over this passage. And there's something that happens here, and Jeremiah explains this event in some detail, which is pretty eye-opening. But again, Moses said, don't be afraid. God has come to test you. The fear of him may be before you. That's interesting, right? He doesn't want the fear in you. He wants the fear before you. Even that language, I think, is really fascinating. We're not going to dive into that, but is God showing off his power from the top of the mountain? Yes. Does he want that fear to go in you? No. He wants it to go before you. He wants you to know, he's really big. He is really strong. He could rip this mountain to shreds, but he's on your side, and so that's the display of power here. But it says this, and this is the thing. The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was, right? They don't listen to Moses. And I think we kind of quickly glance over this and we could get past this and see, well, then now there's just a bunch of laws for altars, right? There's more laws. Next chapter, laws about slaves. Keep going. Laws about stealing, laws about social justice, right? So, if you just continue on with Exodus, now there's just a bunch more laws about stuff that then gets spelled out by God to Moses. And way back in Exodus, 20, like, did anything happen there? Did like something happen that we missed in this interaction? And Moses is like, whoa, 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 don't walk away. And the children of Israel are like, no, we're going to walk away, right? So they're supposed to, either go to the foot of the mountain, and who knows what might have happened, right? God may have at a certain point said, hey, why don't you come up here? But while God was speaking the 10 commandments, and he had already given them the day before, kind of a really simple covenant. I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people, nation of priests. Listen to my voice. The people freaked out, and then they decided, all right, we're going to stand way off. And Moses, we want you to two things: speak to God for us, represent us, and then tell us what he says. Give us the rules, right? We want representation and we want rules. And Moses, we want you to do that for us. And we're going to go to Jeremiah 7, where this all started, where I said there was something really interesting we wanted to see. So Jeremiah 7, Jeremiah is a pretty sad prophet. The Israelites are not doing too good during Jeremiah's time. There's already been several attacks against the two nations of Israel. Israel's divided into two nations now. And I'm going to skip a lot of background information because we're just kind of looking for this passage here. But God is rebuking the children of Israel. He's not happy with their sacrifices. He's not happy with their festivals. And this is a common theme. But Jeremiah, while he's kind of telling the people this, he has this incredible insight on what happens at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19 and 20. All right. So this is kind of part of the Lord's rebuke. He says, add to your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, and just eat the flesh, right? He basically is saying, like, you might as well just break the law. If you're going to make a sacrifice, just eat the flesh too, because I don't even care at this point about your sacrifice. He's kind of saying, just, I don't care what you do. And then he says this, and this is the passage that's just, pretty exciting. For the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, right? So this is now back to Exodus. I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. And you're like, well, but you did. You did talk to them about that stuff. In fact, you talked to them about it a whole lot. But Jeremiah is sort of pausing during an interaction at Mount Sinai, and I'll show you how we can catch this. But this command I gave them, obey my voice. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Walk in the way that I will command you, that it will be well with you, right? What does that sound like? That sounds like Exodus 19, where God says, I'm going to make you a nation of priests. I'm going to be your God. You're going to be my people, and you're going to listen to my voice, right? That's what we're going to do. So when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, there's a clue, but they did not obey or incline their ear, but walked in their own counsels and the stubbornness of their own evil hearts. And what did they do? They went backward and not forward. From the day your fathers came out of the land of Egypt to this day, I have sent my servants and my prophets day after day. They're not listening to me. They're not inclining their ear. They did worse than their fathers, right? But just kind of catch what he says here. They were wicked. They didn't listen to what I said. They walked in their own counsel and the stubbornness of their own evil hearts. It's funny how he characterizes what happened, not necessarily as you were scared, but actually there was evil in your heart. And it kind of makes sense, by the way, because the way you react to God showing up in power, I've heard the fear of God described this way before. I don't think it's a great explanation. It definitely doesn't capture everything, but it's sort of like when you see a police officer out of nowhere, right? And it's like, well, if you see a police officer and you have this feeling of comfort and even excitement, because you know that he or she is there to protect you and help you, great. Then that's because you probably aren't expecting to have a bad experience with this police officer. But if you just broke the law, you just stole something, you were just speeding down the road, and you see a police officer, what's that feeling that you feel? You feel scared because maybe there's some evil in your heart. You've done something recently, right? But I just want to kind of point out went backward and not forward. So we're talking about Exodus 19 and 20, and Jeremiah looks back on this event, whether this was commonly understood to be what happened here in the Sinai event, or this is, divinely inspired history on Jeremiah's behalf. But either way, we believe what Jeremiah says, which is you went backwards and not forward. When I brought you out of the land of Egypt, basically when I brought you to the mountain, he's looking at this event and saying, you did something very wrong here. So what did he say again about the sacrifices and burnt offerings, right? I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. And again, he's talking about the burnt offerings that they are offering him now. And he's basically saying, just go ahead and eat the flesh of your own burnt offerings. Like your offerings are terrible to me. And he's saying something, I never really wanted the sacrifices. I never really wanted the offerings. Now, that's a huge statement because you have to understand that, there's a lot that goes into that category, right? You're talking about the tabernacle. You're talking about the altar, the priesthood. You're talking about all the ritual cleansings and all this stuff. And God is sort of saying with this one sweeping statement, that wasn't plan A, guys. That wasn't what I was going to do until you went ahead and decided to walk backward and not forward, right? So hopefully we're capturing here, there's just really like 5 verses between 22 and 25, 26 that have this incredible statement about Mount Sinai that I think is just really worth thinking about for a second. So I think the idea for God is he wanted to bring the whole nation of Israel, right, to the mountain. And then he was actually going to make them all priests, right? Every single one of them, right? And it was going to be a nation of priests, and they were all just going to follow his voice. And then, he's going to be their God, and, they're going to be his people. And there was this really simple giving of a covenant. And he did give the 10 Commandments, by the way. So I do think the original giving of the law included, I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people, but also let's include the 10 commandments, right? But then beyond that, it was just going to be just follow me and listen to my voice, right? That was sort of the whole idea was I'm going to just lead you as a people. But then what did the people ask for from Moses, right? What did we talk about? They said, we want rules and they want representation, right? And so we'll go back and look at that just to confirm. I don't want you to think that I'm making that up, but let's go back to Exodus and see exactly what the people asked Moses for again. And this is in chapter 20, 10 commandments, God speaking, big fireworks show. People are freaking out. And then they said, you speak to us and we will listen, right? And do not have God speak to us. Moses says, hey, do not fear. God's come to test you. And the people instead stood far off, right? Instead of listening to what Moses said, the people decided we're going to stand far off. This is too scary for us. We want representation. You speak to us and we will listen. We do not want God to speak directly to us. And all we want is the rules and representation. And I think if you were going to try to summarize the Old Testament law, the sacrifices, the priesthood, the tabernacle, the altar, like all the stuff that really goes into the Old Testament law, and there's a lot to it. We know, I suppose, from a New Testament perspective, that those were really a big representation of Christ and the more simplified, I suppose, covenant that God always wanted to give us. But I even want to highlight that from the very beginning, God had this idea of a much simpler covenant for the people of Israel, right? Which included that they all be priests, right? So maybe look just for a second back at this passage, because I think it's important to kind of notice that, again, God said, if you will just kind of obey my voice and keep my covenant, right? Really simple covenant, 10 commandments, and you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, right? So the idea wasn't necessarily that God was not going to not have priests, but the idea was that the whole nation would be a nation of priests. And up to this point, the priests, they had priests. Israel actually had priests. It was kind of Aaron and his brothers, and they were Levites, but it wasn't formalized. God didn't really pick the Levites yet. That happens chapters later after this. And so when God finally formalizes it, in the covenant, and he says, okay, we'll make the tribe of Levi within the nation of Israel, we'll make you guys the priests to the nation of Israel. That was a different plan than what was kind of outlined here. So I think what I'm trying to say is the way we really look at God's Old Testament covenant was sort of a plan B, and I think there's this incredible insight from Jeremiah 7 that means so much when we look back on the Old Testament law to know that God didn't want to give them all the rules and representation. Even back then, God had this idea, simple covenant, simple rules, just follow me. I'll be your God, you be my people. And I think that becomes this incredible insight for us, even as New Testament believers who have a much simpler covenant. We can be drawn sometimes to ask God out of fear, right? Maybe we fear God, we fear disobeying him. We want him to give us rules and representation. We are a royal priesthood ourselves now as New Testament believers. And God says, I don't really want to give you a set of rules. I mean, if anything, Christ came and was constantly sort of breaking the rules. I'm not saying he broke the law, but he certainly broke some rules that felt very close to the law based on the standards of his day. And they kind of kept saying to Jesus over and over again, hey, it really feels like you're breaking the rules. And Jesus kept saying stuff like, was man made for the Sabbath or Sabbath made for man? And they knew the answer to that question, right? So the law was made on the request of the people of Israel to Moses to give them rules and representation, right? And it's easy to miss that if we don't realize God told them, come up to the mountain and stay right there and listen to me. And then they decided the very next chapter, this is too much. This is too hard. Whether it's the wickedness of their heart, that's what Jeremiah says, or just the fear of God that got misdirected, which is what Moses said in chapter 20. For whatever reason, they said, give us rules and representation. And then God said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you rules and representation. It'll point you to the truths of how much I love you and how much I want you to follow me. But it looks like I can't really have you fully represent me right now. Maybe I'll pick one tribe to represent me to you in the meantime. And then we'll kind of come up with even another plan, right? Which ultimately was the new covenant after this covenant was established. So hopefully that's been fun little Bible journey for you, and it's interesting. On this channel, I hope to post lots of videos like this that get you excited to learn new stuff about the Bible, read the Bible for yourself. Go read these passages. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I missed something. Tell me if there's other verses that seem to confirm this thing that I'm telling you, which was the way we understand the Old Testament law, the sacrifices, the priests, the temple, the altar, all that stuff was never really in God's original design when he took them to Mount Sinai. That's what I'm arguing. And even in that, I think there's something meaningful for us as New Testament believers to understand that God really just wants this intimate, voice-based relationship with him and us where he is leading us day by day. And it's easy to say, God, I just want the rules. Tell me what rules I need to follow. And he says, yeah, there's some basic rules, the 10 commandments that you probably know already that you should follow. And the rest just really takes this interaction with God, with the Holy Spirit he's given us to help guide us so that we can become a great nation of priests for him on his behalf to the world. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.